My goals today are to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to share my family story, part of it, because it's too long to tell in an hour. And then I want us to consider ways that an understanding of the past shapes our identity. And I want to talk about why history matters. So who am I? So as you can see, on the far left, you see a red passport. So I became a German citizen. I'm a dual citizen. In the middle, I am wearing academic regalia because, as Lori said, I was a professor. And in the middle, I'm a wife. That's my husband, Don, and I. I am a mother. I have 2 daughters. They're in the next picture to the right. Then I'm a sister and a sister-in-law and an aunt and a great aunt. And then in the middle row with the ribbon, you'll see me as one of the people cutting the ribbon at the new Einstein Museum in Ulm, Germany, D. Einsteins, that I helped work on for 6 years. There you see my kids and my grandkids at the entrance of the Einsteins at the opening. As you can see, I'm a Waukegan resident. I have been for 2 decades. That church on the right, that is the Ulmer Münster. It's a big, it's not a cathedral, but people call it one. It's the tallest, it's been the tallest cathedral or church in the world until like about 3 weeks ago when the Sagrada Familia beat it. And all they would have to do is put a spire on, or a telephone pole or something extra to make it a little taller. In the orange, where you see me in the orange dress, there I spoke to 1,000 people in Germany who were very worried about the rise of the AfD, which is the neo-Nazi party. And I've spoken extensively in Germany and in Serbia. The next picture shows my blended family. That's the wedding of my stepson, Jonathan, and he married a Filipino girl. So we have a very extended blended family. My husband has 4 kids. I have 2, so we have 6 kids, and we have 9 grandkids altogether. There you see me in a classroom in Serbia and in Germany. So that's a little bit about who I am. Growing up, I had no idea that the Holocaust had anything to do with me. I grew up in what I like to call a culture of silence. These are my parents. My mother was Annalisa Hirsch, and my father was Armin Gilnert. They were European. They had strong accents and didn't talk like the other people on our block. My father was 43 years old when I was born, old enough to be my grandfather, but I was his first child, supposedly. And my mom was 31. I don't know. I'm still searching. I think he had another family. I'm pretty sure. So anyway, my parents were really superstitious. And so when I was like 2 years old, just before my brother was born, they bought a house. They bid on a house in Lincolnwood. And on their way back to their apartment, they got into a fender bender. And they're like, oh my God, that's such a bad omen. We can't buy that house. Serious. And that house was in a neighborhood with lots of refugees. I mean, I know this now. So they bid on a house 6 blocks away, because my father was a tuberculosis doctor, and he had a position at the Municipal Tuberculosis Sanitarium, which was at Peterson and Pulaski. And so those of you who know anything about Chicago, busy streets are like gang turf dividers. So they bought a house in Sauganash. It was 6 blocks away, but a completely different neighborhood. It was dominated by Queen of All Saints Basilica and the Sauganash Community Church. So it was a totally different type of neighborhood. But inside our house, I would say the Danube flowed through our house. We ate all these foreign foods, particularly German foods. We ate spätzle and goulash and chicken paprikash. My mother had beer steins and a plate with the Münster Church. And that bird is called the Spatz, which is the bird of It supposedly saved the city at one point, and it's a good story. My mother wore an Edelweiss necklace, and she was from Ulm. Okay? And on Thanksgiving, it was just my mom, my dad, my brother, and me. And I would stare out the window and pine for family. I'd see all these aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins going into all our neighbors' house, and yet it was just the four of us, and I was so sad about that. My dad came from Europe, like I said, and he was an orphan. He didn't have any family at all. No mother, father, brothers, sisters, cousins, nobody. So we were doing this great experiment called the American Melting Pot. And we only spoke English at home. And even though my parents' English wasn't very good, we spoke English. And I think my brother and I learned most of our language from television. One day a neighbor came over and she knocked on the door and she's like, "Miss Gilnert, can I come in for a cup of coffee?" "Sure, come on in." And so the neighbor said, I love Karen. She's such a lovely girl, but I'm really worried about her." "Why are you worried about my Karen?" said my mom. "I'm worried that she will be damned and go to hell. Please let us take her to church with us." So my mom just took a gulp, I think, and she said, "Oh, I used to go to church with my governess when I was a little girl in Germany. Sure, she can go with you." So I ended up going to this Baptist church with this family. And then on Wednesdays it was Awana, and I had to learn all these Bible verses, right? And somehow my brother got off the hook. He did not have to go. Then when I was in 8th grade, my teacher was Miss Peterson at Sauganash Elementary School, and she singled me out. Like, imagine, I'm 13. "Karen, why are you in school today?" "Well, Miss Peterson, I come to school every day. I plan to get perfect attendance again." I had no idea why she had done that. Then I came home, and my mother said, "Shh, be very quiet. Your father didn't go to work today." "Why didn't he go to work? Is he sick?" "No, he's doing something called fasting, and he's praying in the basement." Well, this was beyond me. My dad always told us that, he only got a potato a day in the camp. So why would he starve himself? And then on the table, I saw cards, New Year's cards. But my mother was never early for anything. So she was still late because she was a week late. Those were Rosh Hashanah cards, and this was Yom Kippur. But I had no idea, and there was no explanation. Now, a few months later, I came home. It was March, mid-March, and sitting on the table where I did my homework was this envelope, and it was addressed, typewritten, to Miss Karen Gilnert. Nobody ever sent me anything typewritten. And on the right-hand side in the corner, there was a stamp. Now, who's on that stamp? Can you see? Albert Einstein. And it's stamped first day of issue, March 14th, 1966. So that was his birthday, Pi Day. And I opened it up, and it was empty. And there was no return address. And I said, "Mom, why did I get this?" My brother didn't get it. She said, "Oh, well, when I first came to America, I lived with Albert Einstein. He was my sponsor." "He was what?" "He was my sponsor. He wrote an affidavit and paid for my trip. And let's take this and put it in the strong box, because one day you'll be glad you have it." And she put it in the strong box, which is like a metal box where we had important papers. And she closed the box, and she closed the conversation. And I couldn't get anything else out of her. But, I was very curious, and we had an Encyclopedia Britannica. So I started finding, who is this guy, and why would he be interested in me? And why would he be interested in my mom? So I decided to learn all I could about Albert Einstein. And, I love mystery stories. How many of you like mysteries? Okay, well, I love mysteries. I had read all the Nancy Drew and all the Hardy Boys and so on. So I learned that he was born in Ulm, Germany, just like my mom. He was a physicist. He was a mathematician. He had won the Nobel Prize. He lived in Princeton, New Jersey, and it was stamped from Princeton. Huh. And his stamp was part of this Great American series. So how would I know somebody that was a great American like that? And of course, we all learned decades later, he was also Time Magazine's Person of the Century. But to me, he became much more, because he was a great humanitarian. And without Albert Einstein, I doubt I would be here talking to you today, because you will learn that all my mom's relatives that were not saved did not make it. So now, continue. That was 8th grade, right? Now I'm in 9th grade, and I go to von Steuben High School, and the population's a little different, and a lot more Jewish kids. And when I was in biology, the boy in front of me, he wanted to date me. And he said, "But Karen, I can only date Jewish girls. Are you Jewish?" So I said, "Well, I don't know. Let me go home and ask my mother." I had no idea. And so I go home and I ask my mom, and she's like, "Well, why do you want to know this?" "Because this boy wants to date me and I want to go out with him. But he can only date me if I'm Jewish. Please let me be Jewish." And she goes, "Well, go ahead. Tell him your father is Jewish." So I'm really excited, and I go to school and I'm all excited, and I say, "Hey, Lori, I'm half Jewish." "Which half?" "My father is Jewish." "Wrong half." And then nobody else would go out with me. The word got out. And I was so unhappy that at the end of the year, guess what my parents did? They transferred me to North Park Academy. North Park Academy was Swedish Covenant. It was attached to North Park College. It's no longer in existence. And we had to go to chapel 3 times a week, Christian. And there, nobody would play with me either. A girl from Saguenay told me that if I wasn't Swedish or Greek, I'd just never fit in. So anyway, it goes on. Then I'm at North Park, and I had this wonderful history teacher in 11th grade, world history, and we were studying World War II, and she believed in primary sources. So she had us read Hitler, A Study in Tyranny. This book is like this thick. And so I asked my dad, I said, "Daddy, you were in the war. Did this really happen?" And you know what he said? He gets really upset. He goes, "Just read the book. Just answer the questions. And you don't need to know." And that's when my nightmares started. For 40 years, I had nightmares. Then it was my 18th birthday. Now, 18 is a very important number, particularly in Judaism. It brings luck. And this was a big day. And my parents said, "We want to talk to you." And I thought, "Oh, good, I'm going to get this great present, right? What's my present going to be?" And so they sat me down on the couch. And my mother sat down. And my mother never sat down. She was always doing something. And they said, "Well, we want to talk to you about who you are. Now you're 18 and you can decide." What can I decide? You can decide what you want to be. You are actually 100% Jewish. Your mother is Jewish. But we wanted you to decide when you turned 18. So I was extremely angry. First of all, think of all the boys I could have dated. I mean, it's just so unfair. And so my dad handed me this folder with these documents. It was 5 pages that were photocopied from the San Francisco News, and it was entitled Flight from Germany, story of a couple's flight from Germany, from Nazi Germany. And my grandfather had written it, and it was published in 1942 on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor in December. It went for 5 consecutive days. And they said, and we have this ring we'd like to give you. And so this is the ring. I'm wearing it today. And when your grandparents got to Japan, because you see, they couldn't go the Western route because the war was raging, and they went across Russia and Siberia and China. And when they got to Japan, they didn't think their money would be worth anything. And so they bought a pearl. And they sewed it in your grandmother's dress because, you know, people stole jewelry and searched people. And so they sewed it in her dress. And then when they arrived in San Francisco, there was a lot of fanfare because of who their sponsor was, because it was on their passenger manifest. And so they didn't have to use the pearl to pay for eating and shelter. And they made it into a ring, and that's my ring. But I was so angry at my parents that I didn't know what to do. And so the next month, I was now in college, and because I skipped my senior year, North Park closed. And so I skipped my senior year, and I saw this advertisement for a program in Mexico. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go there. I'm going to escape. So I went to Mexico for a long summer, and when I came back and I finally wanted to be a teacher, I became a bilingual teacher, and I started working on behalf of immigrants, and I've worked for immigrants, on behalf of immigrants, my entire career. So I took on this new identity, and I became kind of a Latina. And so I worked in this port of entry community called Pilsen, and that was my entry. And that became very important to me, and I became an advocate for Latino rights and helping people find housing. And this was my life. But then I fell in love at Northwestern, and I married this guy. And my mom was just ecstatic because his name was Carlson. What a great name, a Christian name. But my prospective mother-in-law was very upset. And she said, you know, where I grew up, there were signs, no Jews, no dogs. And John, if you marry her, you'll be one of them. He married me anyway, but it was very difficult. And then when our first child was born, what did we name her? Christina Marie. And then my godmother said, you can't do that. You have to name that child after your father, because my father had just passed away. And of course, I knew no traditions because I wasn't raised as a Jew. And so then we changed it to Christina Alana. Then my mother-in-law had a fit because some relative of my husband's had Marie in her name. So then she became Christina Alana Marie. And she was named Christy, actually, because I told you I loved mysteries, and I went into labor having finished my 60th Agatha Christie mystery, and her nickname is Christy, so she really wasn't named Christina for anything Christian. It was really after Dame Agatha, but nobody else knew that. But I have to tell you that I actually repeated the same thing with my kids. I raised them to think they were Latinas. I sent them to brownies in our neighborhood in Evanston. It was like 1/3 Latino, 1/3 black, 1/3 white. I was a bilingual teacher there. I sent her to a bilingual brownie troop. I sent her to Mexico to camp. I mean, my kids were raised to be bilingual. And when Christina was in college, she volunteered at Mujeres Latinas in Pilsen. And she was saying, well, something about, we do this or that. And the girl goes, we? You're not one of us. You will never be one of us. You may speak Spanish, but you are not a Latina. And this caused my daughter almost a breakdown. She was so upset. And so then I sat her down like my parents. I gave her my grandparents' letters, and she decided to start studying she studied a course in Judaism, at her modern Judaism in college. And you know who she married? A rabbi's son. And she's Orthodox. And now she's named Alana. She doesn't use her first name at all. And my other daughter married a German from Germany. Very schizophrenic, isn't it? I carried on the trauma. That's why I think it's really important. You need to know who you are, and you need to teach kids to be proud of it, no matter what. So when in 1978, when my daughter was born, that followed the year before. Chancellor Helmut Schmidt of Germany, he visited Auschwitz, and he later reads, and he made a big deal in Germany about that they needed to reconcile and own their past. And so this started this path of reconciliation with the former Jewish community. And so on the 40th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is in November, they invited all the Jewish people that they knew, who they had addresses for, to come to Ulm, all expenses paid. So you know how many people came? 5. That's not a very nice holiday, or, it was a horrible, horrible night, broken glass. And so those people, though, got together and they said, let's work on this. Let's help Stadt Ulm. We all know people. And so they started to reach out across the world to this Jewish diaspora that came from my mother's hometown. And then 10 years later, they had another reunion, but they were smart. And they moved it to the summer, to this wonderful holiday called Schwormontag. And that's when the mayor takes the oath again, and he swears, to uphold all the values of the city of Ulm. And during this holiday, all these people came together, and my mother went. And now, you want to know how many people came? 151 from 5. And it was so successful that they did another reunion 3 years later, in 91. And then in 97, they did it again. And at that time, my mother said, Karen, I want you to come with me to Germany. You don't work in the summers. I said, I do work in the summers. I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm an administrator. But I got permission, and I went. And I met all these people that I was related to. And I had no idea I was related to anybody. And I finally felt like I fit in somewhere. And it meant a lot to me. And then a few years later, in 2004, they invited us, my family and 5 other families who were very close relatives of Albert Einstein, to come to the 125th birthday celebration of Albert Einstein. And they had like the president of Germany and the ambassador to Israel and us, five families, and we were one of them. And I started to understand a little bit more about our relationship and all that my mother had left behind. So, and then a few years later, they rebuilt the synagogue, and I was invited to come to the synagogue's ribbon cutting. And I met a historian. His name was Ingo Bergman, and he became my friend, and he helped me to figure out a little bit more about my family. So At the same time, my mother got Alzheimer's, and so she was not really able to come with me. And we had to sell my mother's house for her care, to pay for her care. And so I went a little bit early, and I found in that same strong box with the envelope with Einstein, a curriculum vitae my father had written in 1963, and it had names and places of all these events in his life, places he had been, camps he had been, and I was very excited. So, move forward, they invited me to Ulm, and I decided I would try to also search for my father at the same time. Ingo Bergman put out this book, and it is a Holocaust memorial book, and I was shocked when I got it because the picture on the cover, that was my mother and her scout troop. She had said she was a scout leader. Well, it turned out she wasn't a scout leader. I learned from these people on this trip that, in fact, the kids were kicked out of school. My mother was expelled from school when she was 15. She never went back to school. And she helped start a school in the synagogue. And this lady, she goes, your mother was my mentor and my confidant and my teacher. I was like, but I don't know what that means. Well, she taught us to read, write, and compute when we couldn't go to school. And then when we couldn't join Hitler Youth, and everybody wanted to join Hitler Youth, she started a youth group for us. And I had no idea. So in 2018, I was invited to Ulm, and I was invited to come and give a talk about Einstein and my family. And I felt like I was going to be an imposter because I didn't know enough, really. And, I like to be an authority, so I was like, I better learn. So it was like a second dissertation. And I learned all I could, and then I filled my suitcase with all these documents, my mother's diaries, her photo albums. She kept a diary from 1933 to 1939. So that's when National Socialism came to Germany. But it was all in German, and I couldn't read a thing. So I came to Ulm, and I discovered a lot about my family. Here you see the first two pictures. I'm in the documentation center, and the middle one, imagine a table that is like 6 feet long, and it's covered with this paper, and in pencil, it was a whole family tree and my link to Einstein. It was incredible. I was like floored. That's the Ulm Munster, and that's a statue of Einstein. Then they took me to this building, and this building is called the Englander. And it turns out this building housed the Einstein business in Ulm. It was called Israel and Levy. And Einstein's grandmother, who was also my grandmother's grandmother, she had a feather bed business, and they made these big quilts. And so Einstein only lived in Ulm for 15 months because, you see, his father worked for his mother, the father's mother, his grandmother. And I don't think he liked working for his mother. And so he moved to Munich to start a business, an electrical business, with his brother. However, they stayed in touch, and they were always very close, and they did a lot of letter writing. So this building today is the site of the Einstein Museum. This is a picture of my mother and her brother in Ulm as children, and that building was their home on Neuterstrasse. And then they showed me this, and this was what happened to their home when the Allies bombed it. So there was nothing for me to see. There was no building I could actually walk in and feel my mom. Then they took me to a neighboring town, and it's called Bad Buchau, and it turns out that this is where the Einsteins and the Moses lived. So there were three families that intermarried a lot, the Einsteins, the Moses, and the Hirsches, and that's my stem, I guess, my tree. And so I'm standing there at the grave of Rebecca Einstein, and she lived from 1770 to 1853, and she was the great-great-grandmother of Albert Einstein and of my grandmother. So as you all know, Hitler and National Socialism came to Germany in 1933. Just to give you a little bit of history, and you can think about what's going on today. What did Hitler do? First, he eliminated his political opposition. He banned other parties. He used emergency powers. He bypassed parliament. All aspects of German life were brought in line with the Nazi ideology. He imposed economic controls. He used propaganda to instill a vision of national renewal while creating an atmosphere of terror. They boycotted Jewish businesses. They expelled Jews from the professions. There were educational restrictions about who could then go to school. They burned books. They took them off the shelves, the books that did not match their ideology. And then the Nuremberg laws came and stripped Jews of their citizenship, prohibited intermarriage, and they used the U.S. racial laws to determine who was black, to decide who was a Jew. So Einstein experienced a lot of discrimination himself in his lifetime. Do you know that he was given the Nobel Prize for 1921, but they delayed it for a whole year because they didn't want to give this man who had Jewish science that they didn't trust. And so, but he had been passed over 10 times for the Nobel Prize. He was nominated 10 different times. And they did not give it to him for the theory of relativity. They gave it to him only for the photoelectric effect and his service to theoretical physics. In 1929, a publishing house in Leipzig published a book, 100 Authors Against Einstein, and they had all written an essay against him, and it was published and widely distributed. So then in December of 1932, Einstein was preparing to go to California. He spent the winters in California teaching at Caltech. And he was about to leave, and there was a knock on his door, and there at the door was a Nazi general. And he said, Professor Einstein, we know that you are going to America. We advise you don't come back. Your life is no longer safe in Germany. So he and Elsa left with 30 suitcases. And they moved to Belgium, and they were living with a friend. And the Belgian government said, Professor Einstein, we can't keep you safe. You're marked for assassination, and there's no border that could protect you here. So then he went to England and stayed with a friend, and he was under armed guard night and day. And at that point, somebody from the Institute for Advanced Studies came to Princeton came to England and invited him to take this position in Princeton, which he accepted. So I think that's pretty awful. And this picture of him, it says "not yet hung," because there was a poster out that he was marked for assassination, and somebody else who was on this poster was assassinated. Another philosopher. It was a philosopher. And so he moved to the United States. And like I said, Hitler imprisoned his opposition. He put them in, the first concentration camps had nothing to do with the Jews. It had to do with communists, socialists, clergy, anyone who was outspoken against him. There were boycotts, like I said, and it says only Germans can shop here. So my mother's diaries, the first one that I found interesting, it was in May of 1934, and she said, today I went to the Danube pool for the first time. The water was 17 and the air was a warm 24. I swam down with Lottie Strauss, that's her best friend. That's like 75 degrees. And in the morning I went on a short bike ride. Richard Lotte and Edith were also there. It was wonderful. So you can see she was just a normal teenager. Then it got worse. Jews in Ulm are no longer welcome. Nazi flags appeared everywhere. My mother was terrified of marching. She would never go out on the 4th of July. She was terrified. In her next diary, she goes, "How hot it is today, and I don't think I can go back to the pool in the Danube. Among the cruel people, they don't want me because I'm Jewish. What can I do about that? But Hermie and Mr. Schallman have taught me how beautiful Judaism is, so I will be proud and happy to be Jewish and live for my Judaism." And this was in the inside cover, and it translated her 6 tenets were to be able to laugh constantly and over little, to be strong, to be brave, to be mature and stay pure, have big thoughts and a pure heart, to be devout. So there's several things here. They studied the Jewish state by Herzl and learned about Zionism, and they debated. She was like 13, 14 years old, and debated about whether it was better to be a Zionist or a German. There was a German group that was also fighting Hitler. Today we debated the difference. Then we saw a movie, Palestine. I thought German Jewish was wrong. At least the Zionists know what they fight for, the land of freedom in the future. I dreamt of Palestine, but when I woke up, I am still a German Jew. And then on June 7th, she said, "It's my confirmation." So she was even bat mitzvahed. I got 91 presents. It was festive in the synagogue, and no one got stuck. So she's just a kid, again. Then Einstein started writing letters on behalf of family members. And so I introduced you to my cousin Michael. So this letter was written for his father, Alfred, and it helped him to emigrate to England and to Palestine. And this was written by Albert Einstein. I told you about the Nuremberg laws. My mother was 15. This is her with that plaque. And here's her with the group of kids in the forest. So this is her diary from October of 1936. Now she's 15. And she says that she's wandering around Ulm and she has a feeling that she's going to have to depart, and she feels overwhelming loss and sadness. And she would never forget her Ulm, her Danube, and she would always carry it in her heart. And so there it is. Come 1938, and the synagogue was set on fire. All the businesses were smashed. This was the pogrom Nacht, and 18 members of my family were sent to Dachau. My grandparents wrote to Albert Einstein and decided that my mom would go first. It took almost a year for them to arrange it. So this is my mother's diary from August 4th, 1939. I'm 18 and a half years old and soon emigrating alone, but I will still have to produce my papers. So this here is her birth record in the city hall, and they changed all the girls' names so that she wasn't just Annalise, she became Annalise Sarah. And the boys, I think, became Moses in the middle. Anyway, everybody had to have this other name that marked them as Jewish. A disgrace, actually, but you do it anyway. There's no need to write that there was a 9th of November and that we're living in a terrible, gruesome time, because I will never forget it. Nor do I need to stir up my feelings about Lotte no longer being here. What does stir up even mean? Has that wound ever healed? It will be with me as long as I live. Her best friend committed suicide, 18. That's what she was talking about. So this is the passenger manifest. She left on the SS Manhattan on August 30th, 1939. 2 days later, the Nazis invaded Poland. But when she crossed the border into France, the French police arrested her and interrogated her for 7 days. Can you imagine being 18 and being interrogated for 7 days? And then one of the police, I guess, fell in love with her, and they let her go, which is funny. So here it is. This is from the National Archives. This is my mom. That's her passport picture. And as you can see, Friend's name means your sponsor, cousin Professor Albert Einstein. She left from Le Havre, and her destination was 112 Mercer Street, which was his house in Princeton. But I told you the French policeman loved her. So I found the letter, and I had it translated as well. And I'm going to read it because I've never gotten a letter like this, and I just think it's pretty cool. By the time my letter reaches you, you will have arrived in the United States. Thousands of kilometers separate us. You made such an impression on me that I can say I will never forget you. I will always keep the memory of you deep in my heart as a pious feeling, and your gentle image will never fade from my eyes. After your departure last night, I was happy to see you again, but also deeply sad to let you go. The next day, I wanted to run after you, but it would have been selfish. I think I've done the right thing. Then he writes, very latest news. French radio reported today, 1st of September, 5:45 a.m., the war in Poland was attacked by German troops. In other words, this is the signal for war in Europe. France will honor her obligations to Poland, and you see, my dear little friend, it would have been insane to keep you here. What would have become of you? However, should tragedy prevent me from returning, you may be assured that I shall have your sweet name forever on my lips before I die. Wow, right? I never got a letter like that, have you? So when my mom came to America, she thought she was coming to, a land of freedom. But it wasn't so friendly in 1939. There had been a pro-Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden with 20,000 people. And then there was the voyage of the damned, the SS St. Louis, which was refused entry and turned back to Europe. And almost all those people were killed. Then there was a bill in Congress, the Wagner-Rogers bill, which would have brought 20,000 Jewish children without their parents, all by themselves on the kinder transports. And guess what? The Congress never brought it to a vote. So those 20,000 kids never made it. And then, of course, we had Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford and Father Coughlin campaigning for America First. Yeah, this is the house on Mercer Street, and we got to go there again last week, and I got to see the guest room where my mom slept, which is pretty cool. And you can't. It's private, but we had to appeal to the board of the Institute for Advanced Studies because Einstein had in his will that he didn't want his house to be used as a museum. But family members were allowed, so that's why we got to go. And my mother thought that in America she needed to learn how to drive. Einstein gave her $200 to get started, and one of the first things she did was to get driving lessons. And he thought she was such a foolish girl. What a waste of his money, he said. So I told you my grandparents couldn't get out for another year. It was already 1940, the war was going on. They couldn't go through France, so they flew to Berlin and from Berlin to Moscow, and they got on the Trans-Siberian Express, and they went across Russia, Siberia, China, Korea, and Japan, and then they sailed to America, 15,000 miles. Oh, and my grandfather, they took all their money away when they boarded the plane to Russia. They were only permitted $4 each, the equivalent of $4. And so my grandfather was pretty smart. He went and he bought cigars with every penny he had, and he filled a suitcase with cigars, and he used it to barter, and that helped them with their journey. So this is a letter I found my grandparents wrote. Unfortunately, I cannot report anything positive. I do know that your dear mother was on the first transport to Theresienstadt. This transport also included several other people. And We don't know what happened. Jenny Hill should have gone too, and only escaped her fate because she and my brother-in-law, Hugo, got married. And unfortunately, they were sent to Theresienstadt. And then he says, there are only 16 Jews left in Ulm. I know no one other than Ernst Motz and Fritz. And Ernst was appointed as the Vertrauenmann. That means that they were forced to be the ones to put people on lists. And eventually they came for them too. And then he just says that all correspondence is forbidden. I hope the fact that all the Ulm residents are united there and nothing will prevent them from feeling too lonely or make their sad fate bearable as possible, as the solidarity of the people of Ulm has always been and will probably remain particularly good. They were so naive, weren't they? So anyway, I can go on, but anyway, my grandfather then writes that his sister disappeared from Berlin and they think she was taken to Riga. Then as I said, my uncle's boss was taken to Auschwitz, and they put him on the train too. Well, remember that Fritz, my great-grandfather became an American citizen. So when Fritz was taken by the Gestapo, he said, "You can't take me. I have a very famous relative in America, and you're going to get the Americans mad. Plus, I'm an American citizen. You know, this is my grandfather's citizenship paper, and you know, in America, citizenship is passed from grandfather to father to son, so I'm American." And they believed him. They believed him. His boss went to Auschwitz. He was murdered. He got to go to a POW camp for Americans. Then there was a prisoner exchange, and he was released in this prisoner exchange, but the Americans came and they said, "You're not an American." So then he ends up going to Philippsville in North Africa, and he asks for help, and he writes to Einstein for help. And Einstein says, "Dear cousin, congratulations. Of course, I will sign all the requested documents." So Einstein had to produce his pay. He had to have a letter from the Institute for Advanced Studies. He had to prove that he could support my uncle if he couldn't support himself. He had to produce all his war bonds, his stocks, everything. And then my uncle asked if he could bring a girl with, and he said, "Only if you marry her." So they got married. And this is the cable that, you know, congratulations, he made it. And Einstein says it's a miracle because they kept writing each other. And so these are my grandparents with my mom in America. And then Einstein kept helping them. He wrote letters of reference to help them get a fresh start. He helped them get those articles published, as I told you. And then my grandfather tried to pay him back, and he refused all financial help. And so this is what it says. It says, "I am happy to learn from your letters that you are getting along fine and adjusting to your new environment. I know that it is hard to find work at our age," because they were the same age. "I admire your ability to know the language so well that you can write your experience in English. I most certainly could not do that. Please do not give me back the money that I have given you for the trip. It could not have been spent in a better way, and I am happy about that. Please do not mention it anymore and forget about it. Heartfelt greetings and wishes to all of you." And he signed it Albert. So now it's getting very much warmer. And he says, "Congratulations on the marriage of your daughter. I'm pleased that our people from Ulm could take root in the new land so quickly, and the hike could be completed in good time. If the Nazis collapse there will probably be a big breakthrough. Perhaps Jehovah doesn't mean it so badly for the people as it appears." So my mother met this German man, and they got married. And Einstein writes to my grandparents how much he likes my mother's first husband, Fred Rosendahl. On April 2nd, 1943, he writes, "I was very happy about the visit of Anneliese and her wonderful husband. He looks like a robust man left over from the Maccabees' time, like a solid rock. Very best regards to both of you." And in the museum, they've created a graphic novel about our family. So this is the that letter in graphic novel. It's hilarious, isn't it? Like a solid rock. So here the family is reunited. You have my grandfather, my mother, her brother below, her mother and her mother-in-law from her first marriage, and the woman in the front, that's my aunt, and that's their son. She got pregnant right away. Well, but my mother's first husband died. He had a heart attack, and my mother was a young widow at age 27. So her mother-in-law was an amazing person, and she said, "Annalise, you're too young to be alone." And so she said, "A Yugoslavian doctor is coming to New York for a medical conference, and my friend was in camp with him and knows him, and we think you should meet." So they went to they were supposed to meet in New York at this fancy hotel, which is escaping me right now, the Plaza, and they missed each other. And so they said, "Forget it, I don't want to meet somebody that's unreliable." And so then the matchmaker said, "Come on, that was an honest mistake, try again." So they met, and my father fell head over heels for my mother. I didn't know what charm she had, and he proposed on the first date. And 6 months later, my mom said she would come to Chicago, and so she did, and a year later, I was born. So Einstein helped a lot of people. He didn't just help my immediate family, he helped a lot of relatives, and they escaped. The ones that he could help, they lived. What happened in 2018, that started me on this journey of discovery. We talked about finding family. And so this is Holocaust Memorial Day, and I think we should think about that. I found family in Israel. I found family in England, in Germany, in South Africa, in Vienna, in Boston, and then when I was in Ulm, I met people from all over the world. It was pretty exciting. So now I have actually got a lot of family. But I think it's really important on this day that we reflect on the people we lost. So I'm going to tell you about the people I found that we lost. So the U.S. Holocaust Museum found this letter that my father had written from the camp, and he was trying to get out of Europe. And he had 12 years of experience as a doctor. He spoke 7 languages. He was the camp translator, and nobody wanted him. It was terrible. And he said that all of his family were murdered in concentration camp called Zemun, or in Serbia they also call it Sajmaste. So here is that camp, and this is where my grandmother was taken. And you can see all the men were hung in the city, or they were shot in the forest in my dad's hometown. The women were put in these gas vans. Before they had the gas chamber, they had gas vans, and they would load them up, put the people in, take them for a ride, put on the gas, and then they would dump them. And so that's what happened to a lot of people. And so my grandmother, Ilka Gilnert, was one of them. My father was able to study medicine because his aunt and uncle lived in Vienna, and they helped put him through medical school. Well, when the Nazis came, they tried to escape on the Kladovo transport. This was a boat that had 1,000 people on it, and they sailed down the Danube, and they were going to Palestine. But when they got to the Iron Gate, which is the border between Romania and Yugoslavia on the Danube, they were stopped, and the Nazis came. And so my father's uncle Solomon was taken to the woods, and he was shot, and Bertha was sent to that same concentration camp, and she was killed, and their son disappeared. Their older son, who looks a lot like my dad, his first cousin, he had been a boxer in Vienna, and he made it to England. But England was now at war with Germany, and Austria was part of Germany, so he was arrested as an enemy alien. And he was taken on the ship Dunera and taken to Australia with Nazis. And then a lot of people were outraged at that, And so the British offered a lot of Germans the opportunity to fight for England. So he became a commando and part of the X Troop. Unfortunately, he was killed on D-Day. He was 21 years old. We went to Kupka, Ukraine, which used to be Romania. And when my grandfather was born, it was part of the Austrian Empire. And this was where my grandfather on my father's side was born. And that man with the little hat on top, he was crying when he met me. And he said, "I'm so sorry, it's all my fault." "What's your fault?" "It's my fault that Abrahamovich was killed." So my dad was Gilnert, but he was also Abramovich. And it was something about that their marriage wasn't recognized by the state. It was a religious ceremony. So I don't know the true story, but we have a lot of Abramoviches in our family. And so he said, "I was 7 years old, and the Romanian guard came, and I hid in the haystack. And they found me, and they shook me, and they yelled, 'Where are the Jews?' And I'm so sorry, it's all my fault." And I pointed to Abramovich's house. And he had been in World War I, and he had a machine gun, and he started shooting. And they shot back, and then they put tear gas in the house, and he came out coughing. And they beat him, and they beat him, and they shot him, and it's all my fault he died. This man was like 87 years old, and he was carrying this in his heart. And then the mayor said, "I'll take you to the woods, and I'll show you where the mass grave is." So that bottom picture, the mayor is showing us where the mass grave is. And he said, "For 250 euros, you could put up a memorial." But I wasn't sure I believed it, so I did a little more research. And I found out, yes, there are 17 bodies buried, or 18 bodies buried there on the Abramovich farm. Unfortunately, Russia invaded, and we haven't been able to go back to Ukraine because we wanted to do that. Then we went to Pech, where my father's mother was born, and we learned that 27 members of her family were taken to Auschwitz in 1944. I found this picture of Robert Hirsch, my mother's uncle, and he was a very famous lawyer, and his nephew was Fritz Bauer, who actually brought Eichmann to the Israelis, and he did a lot of prosecution of Nazis in Germany. And my brother was named for him. Well, he committed suicide after Kristallnacht. This was my grandfather's sister that disappeared. She was taken to Riga. We went to Riga, and we found her name on the wall. She was shot in this forest. Then there's another town called Tübingen, and it's also really close to Ulm, and 4 members of the family escaped to South Africa, and 2 were taken to Riga and were also shot. And I told you about my grandmother's brother and his wife. They were killed he was killed in Theresienstadt, and she was sent to Auschwitz. And those are Stolpersteine, which are stumbling stones to commemorate where they last lived voluntarily in Germany. And they're really nice. We did some for my family as well. That's my mother's best friend who committed suicide. This is a friend of my mother's from school, and her name was Sophie Scholl, and she was very famous in Germany. She and her brother and another kid were passing out leaflets against Hitler. They were part of the White Rose organization, and a janitor saw them and brought them to the authorities, and I think 3 days later they were all beheaded in the public square. She was 21 years old, and she was in my mother's class. So he couldn't stand up. And all these first cousins of Einstein were murdered in the Shoah. These are people he could not save. Lena, Bertha, Marie, Hugo, Julius, the family of Robert Einstein, Anna Steiner, they were all murdered. So I thought that the Holocaust had nothing to do with me. And guess what? I was wrong. So I'd like us to just reflect briefly on this poem. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, but there was no one left to speak for me. Pastor Martin Niemöller. Einstein in America fought for social justice. He fought fascism, racism, and anti-Semitism in Princeton. He used to walk through the Black community. He used to help kids with their homework. And he connected his experiences in Nazi Germany with American racism. And he said, I do not intend to be quiet about it. He spoke out. He walked through the Black community, like I said. Kids sat on his porch. When Marian Anderson, a famous opera singer, sang in Princeton, she was not admitted to the hotel because they didn't admit any Blacks at the Nassau Inn. He worked with Paul Robeson, W. Du Bois, and the NAACP. He lectured at the historically Black college, Lincoln University. He was the co-chair of the American Crusade to End Lynching. He said that racism was a disease of white people, and he used his fame to speak out against segregation and discrimination. And I forgot to tell you that in 1933, he started the American Rescue Committee, which is still active today, almost 100 years later, even working in Palestine. It's said that history repeats itself. Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. To me, it feels as though the winds of the 30s and the 40s are at our door. We are living in precarious times. So I ask you, what can we learn from history? What can we learn from Einstein? What do you think he might do today? And what can each of us do? I started speaking because I felt so helpless. I'm not done with my memoir, but I felt that this was my way to educate people. And so I'm wondering what you all think. And those are my kids. That's my grandkids. Yeah, what are we going to do? I mean, seriously, we are living in difficult times.
So we've got time for some questions. Do we have some questions for Dr. Carlson?
You mentioned earlier about your brother. How did he react to the news of people's Jewish?
My brother? He married a Catholic girl. He has Catholic children. He wouldn't come to Ulm to even the opening of the museum. He hasn't come to any of my talks. I don't know. He's not interested. Yeah, it's difficult. We don't know. I think it was Einstein's secretary, but I don't have proof. Who mailed the envelope? It's still a mystery. I really think it was, I think her name was Helen Dukas, and I think she must have, because who would have known where we were from Princeton other than she? And she ended up, she moved into the house with Einstein's stepdaughter, and so I think she kept being his secretary after he died.
Did your brother have a tattoo?
No, he was not in a concentration camp. He was a prisoner of war. But that same prison camp, well, the first one that he was taken to, I read all these accounts of British soldiers that were there, and the commandant said, I do not believe in the Geneva Convention. Don't expect to have the rights that are afforded you in the Geneva Convention. You will not eat the way that you are supposed to. You will not get mail. And if you're Jewish, would you stand over there? And they shot them. And somehow my dad did not go. But, my dad studied in Vienna. And when I was in Vienna at the museum in Vienna, the Holocaust Museum, I think it's actually called the Jewish Museum, I was given a book, and it talked about racism in the School of Medicine and the university in the late 20s and the early 30s. And the brown shirts used to raid the university, and the police didn't help, and they would beat up students, and they would beat up professors, and even one student, I think, was thrown out of a window. So I think he had an inkling. And I also wondered, if you were made a doctor in Vienna, the center of culture, and he loved opera, he loved Vienna, why would he go back to Serbia afterwards? He probably felt it wasn't safe. And so, no, he wasn't in a concentration camp, but he was in several of these prisoner of war camps. And then the last one, they took 300 Polish Jewish prisoners of war and took them to Dachau and shot them. So it wasn't so great either. Somehow he had a way of, I don't know, he survived. He was lucky. You know, you ask, was he lucky or unlucky? I guess he was lucky. It was meant to be. Do you have a question?
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that your parents were quiet about being Jewish, and obviously your father passed away, but as your mother aged, was she more forthcoming about her faith and why she kept quiet about it?
So she still couldn't admit in the dark closet that she was Jewish. She was so traumatized. And my godmother's son, when my godmother went back to the college, and she would watch him, and my mother would have to take Mark to his Hebrew lessons. She dropped him off 2 blocks away from the synagogue. She could not bring herself to be there. But then I think I told you she got Alzheimer's. And as she got Alzheimer's, she forgot it was bad. And so I went in there once, and she was eating a chocolate sundae. And I said, but my mom doesn't eat chocolate. Well, I guess she forgot that. And then she started seeing a rabbi. And she saw this rabbi 2-3 times a week. And so I think it all came back. All the fear left as one of the blessings of Alzheimer's. I think there was a question over here. Yes?
I noticed you had an entry that you quoted from your mother's diary about Humpy and Mr. Shalman. Is that Mr. Shalman from?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So
I know he was a refugee. I didn't know he was
So this is the story. We went to the Bodensee. My mother used to go to the Bodensee, which is a Lake Constance. It's called Bodensee in German. And in the early 30s, the Jewish people, they decided that the kids didn't know enough about Judaism, and so certain families that lived on the lake would invite kids to be educated in Judaism. And actually, he was studying at the time he was a kid, and my brother said that he went with her once to meet him. So yes, this is the same person. It's the diaspora. So yes?
Do you call yourself Jewish today, or?
I do.
Okay.
I do, but I still have a hard time. I took my daughters to the Drake Hotel for high tea for my daughter's 40th birthday, and the doorman asked me where I was from, and I said Germany and Yugoslavia, and my kids are like, Mom. And then when we were in Germany and I became a citizen and I registered, you have to register with the city where you live, and she asked my religion, and I just said, oh, I'm Christian. And Don, my husband, he goes, Karen, that's not why you're here. It's just like automatic. And so then I said, okay, I'm Jewish. And so she goes, that's good, because now you don't have to pay taxes. And I said, well, what about my husband? You didn't ask about him. Oh, I just assumed. I said, but maybe he's not. Well, then he'll have to pay taxes. He's Jewish, that's okay. But it's scary, because with the push of a button, they knew where I was. If things change, there's a lot of anti-Semitism growing. The AfD is the second most powerful party in Germany, and in half of Europe, the right has taken hold. And so, it's a precarious time there too. Yes.
What's next? Are you going to take the writing of your mom, maybe read something with it?
Well, I'm writing a book, and
Is it going to incorporate?
Parts of it will be incorporated. The Documentation Center in Ulm wanted to take the whole thing and create a separate book with some interpretations of the times. I could write lots of books. There's a lot of stories, and like I said, we went to 14 different countries, and we have stories everywhere. And I'm already at page 450, and I'm not done. And I don't think anybody wants to buy a book that's that long, so I'm probably going to have to split it somehow.
Were you ever able to talk to your father?
No, never, never. He wouldn't talk. They wouldn't talk at all. They felt, I think, that they were protecting us. And, if you know about the German race tables, the number of Jewish grandparents you have determined your fate. And so I think in my parents' mind, if their grandkids would have more Christian grandparents, eventually the threat would go away. Although I don't think it really would. Anybody else? Thank you so much.